The Overwatch mid-season patch had a ton of nerfs, including nerfs to tanks, DPS, and especially supports. There's a bunch of heroes that have shot up and down in power level, so we're going to be breaking down everything you need to know about the mid-season patch meta. Now let's get into it. Sigma has cemented himself as one of the strongest characters in the game right now. Right now, Poke and Brawl are two of the strongest compositions, with Poke being the easiest to run in ranked play. Sigma is an absolute powerhouse in Poke, able to deal damage from range, slowly build up a powerful ultimate, and has abilities that help sustain himself and his team. On top of that, because of Sigma's distance in his engagements, he cares the least about powerful support cooldowns like Nade, especially when compared to the rest of the tank roster. Sigma's basically a necessary pick on any of the long distance maps like Circuit Royale and Havana, but honestly, Sigma is seeing play all over the place, and in the vast majority of rounds that are not high ground centric, Sigma is seeing substantial play. Now, both Zarya and Orisa are still very strong attrition tanks, making up the majority of the Brawl meta, and Brawl is still a very active part of the meta, although not quite as strong or powerful as Poke. It can still be very good on the maps that have closer sight lines, and it's easier to get into your effective range as these tanks, as opposed to poking from distance like Sigma. Now, D.Va's buffs in the reduction of the movement speed penalty while using her primary fire and the increased speed of micro missiles only further cements her place in the S tier. On high ground oriented maps in particular, most of the other dominant tanks have a much harder time, like Sigma, Zarya, or Orisa, and this is where D.Va truly shines on a map like Nubani, for instance. D.Va's also flexible in the composition she can be played in. While she definitely can be played in a dive, which isn't as powerful right now, she also has a place in compositions that combine both Brawl and Poke elements. Now, looking at the tier list, we can see a lot of the changes to the rest of the characters in the meta. Doom nerfs drop him down from the A tier and move him to the B. While Doom is still a very powerful character for displacement, due to his weakened rocket punch, he's going to be a lot less consistent at getting those solo carry impact frags, making him less reliable as a carry character and more a team-oriented displacer instead. Winston is a bit more flexible with the range damage buff, and with supports getting slightly nerfed across the board, Winston is going to be a bit better than he was before. And Roadhog, surprisingly, is moving up from the F tier into the C tier. Still the weakest tank by far, but with the nerfs to Nade in particular, Roadhog can see a little bit more play than before, even if he isn't going to be a staple of the meta. For one reason or another, Roadhog is seeing a bit more play, so look out for him. Now, for low elo, Orisa and Rein are still the best in class. Orisa can completely deny enemy tanks, forcing them to just not play the game, and she's really good at creating a parity state where the enemy tank just doesn't get to make any aggressive plays or do what they want to do at all, and she's relatively easy to play as well. On top of that, Rein is just a fantastic character for potentially carrying low elo. Although characters like Orisa can be problematic for you, many of the other tanks in the game just lose to an aggressive Rein, and Rein's Shatter is still one of the most impactful ultimates in the game, especially for low elo. They're very easy to get off multi-shatters. Now, I think that wraps up our tank tier. BlizzCon revealed Mauga that is jumping into the scene. Although not officially releasing to Season 8, I did want to mention him in this tier list. Mauga is a poke/brawl tank that seems a bit crazy. He has some wild sustain and some great poking capability, but more than anything, what we're seeing is that there's a couple of problems with the character that could weaken his placement in the meta at large. Number one is he's still very weak to nade, being a really easy nade target and someone that relies on him being able to hit criticals to heal himself. Getting naded is almost a death sentence, and also because of his rather large hitbox with no armor, it feels that he requires a ton of pocketing right now to stay alive. I expect this character to get tweaked quite a bit before he fully releases. If I had to give him a place now, I would probably put him in the very low B tier, but it's too early to say for sure. Definitely let us know down below how good you think Mauga is going to be in the meta. Now, moving on to the DPS meta, as the tanks dictate the meta and both Poke and Brawl is very powerful, Sojourn is really dominant at high elos, being able to play consistently in both comps. On top of that, Ashe and Hanzo offer comparable power in both of the ever popular Poke and Brawl comps, so all three of these characters would be perfectly fine playing in these compositions, and I think personal preference plays a huge role in the character you should pick out of these three. Now, the meta hasn't dramatically shifted for the DPS as of Season 7.5. It's relatively similar to 7, although Dive is slightly stronger because of some of those support nerfs, although not strong enough for it to even come close to both Poke and Brawl compositions. Now, on certain maps with high ground or maps like Flashpoint, mobility is king, and characters like Soldier or Genji get a huge increase on these maps in particular, as well as dive compositions as a whole. This is one example of many where certain maps and tank picks actually dictate what DPS characters are good, and it's super important to understand while there are certain compositions and strategies that are super good right now. As a whole, I would consider the meta map-centric, where certain characters and compositions play better on certain maps. Now moving to the tier list, Mei received some slow nerfs, but is still very good, specifically in the Brawl mirror. Bastion received nerfs to his cooldown and his spread, making him weaker, but still will be strong overall in this meta in particular. Very good at countering characters like Zarya and good in the attrition battles, in composition mirrors with characters like Sigma or Orisa. Sombra did get a slight buff to her ult charge, but it doesn't really change her viability. She's going to be good specifically in dive composition, so only really viable on dive maps or maps like Flashpoint, where mobility is extra valuable. Sim's shield nerf from 225 to 200 health total is a big deal, and it really hurts her, especially when she wants to get really up close and personal in a brawl meta. But with that being said, with Orisa still powerful and us still in a close range brawl meta filled with sustain, Sim is still going to be able to get a lot of value, and she's still a pretty solid pick. Widow's ult change and close range non-scope reliability doesn't change her meta viability at all. Now, she would actually be rated higher than the C tier if we considered only Grandmaster 1+, but for the vast majority of players in the vast majority of ranks, even in the higher elos, her one-shot long-range inconsistency just makes her the weaker sniper when compared to the other options available. Now, for a low elo, both Torb and Reaper are still amazing. Torb has a crazy high win rate, and he has a low mechanical skill requirement while still getting a ton of value, especially at shutting down divers. And Reaper's a character that can heavily punish tanks that think they're invincible. Plus, with his extra health, you're going to be more survivable against many of the other types of characters that are just doing trickle damage to you over time. So these characters are the ones I would suggest for low elo. Now, the support role as a whole took some major hits, but all is not lost. While the support role was slightly nerfed almost across the board, most supports are not dramatically weaker, and supports are still very powerful relative to the other roles. Zenyatta was nerfed in a major way with both his Harmony and his Discord getting touched, but still, he was strengthened in a very important way that he was struggling with right now with an extra health boost. And while it seems minimal, only 25 HP, this is a huge deal for a character that's only true weakness is his fragileness. Ana got a slightly nerfed nade cooldown, but is still very strong and one of the strongest characters in the game still. And especially when we consider Mauga coming around the corner, Ana is basically a necessity at shutting him down. So she's going to get extra bonus points just from him coming into the pool very, very soon. Now, Ilari's nerfs are definitely felt. She's going to be weaker and less consistent, but because of how strong she was before, she's still going to be very strong, although less reliable. But don't disregard her outright because she's still a very powerful character and one of the strongest supports in the game right now, nerfs aside. Now, Kiriko did get slightly nerfed, but she's still very strong, if not one of the strongest supports in the game. You honestly can't even tell her changes all that much, and Kiriko is one of the few supports that can fit into every single composition, whether it's poke, brawl, or dive, making her one of the most flexible characters in the game. Baptiste received a heavy nerf, but in poke and brawl meta, he's still perfectly fine, although if we ever moved away from a poke or brawl meta, these nerfs would be heavily felt against dive, and I do think that Baptiste is very weak on maps like Flashpoint because he's too easy to single out, and you're really going to start to feel a lot of the weaknesses in his cooldowns when targeted from multiple directions. Lifeweaver is actually being moved down a tier because of his nerfs. He's still very strong, but these nerfs are the most severe out of all the nerfs in the support role. He's still a very strong character, but his changes are noticeably felt and he feels weaker, so it is something to keep in mind before you lock him every single game. Now for low elo, Moira is still the god of low elo, very strong when people don't have consistent aim to shut you down. You can play aggressive, you can bait out cooldowns, or you can just straight up kill people. Moira is incredibly good at climbing up the low elo ranks and doing it all by yourself as an independent support DPS hybrid, basically. Now this is the full tier list for patch 7.05, but if there's any character you think deserves a buff or a nerf, let us know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for coming by. Smash that subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and we'll see you next time.